In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to a new edition of Emerging Stories. I'm Kadir van Lohuizen, I'm your host, as usual. You can log in at pakhuisdezwijger.nl and you can chat with other viewers and you can ask questions to our guests, which I'm very happy to introduce. Today we will have Geert Mak. Welcome. Geert is I can say a very famous Dutch historian and writer, and has been investigating and writing about Europe since 1998. And we will have two guests on Zoom, which is Cecilia Ferrara from Rome. She's a journalist and a founder of investigative reporting project Italy. Welcome. And we have Gergő Sáling, who's a journalist and executive director at Direct 36 from Budapest, Hungary. So thank you all for being here. And we are doing a live stream on Instagram for the first time today. So hope you will enjoy this broadcast. Geert, well, very happy you are here. I understood you are from Amsterdam, obviously. You know Amsterdam really well. You wrote books about Amsterdam, but you've been kind of in quarantine as well, right? In another part of the Netherlands.
Yeah, in the north, in the village on the north of Friesland. But yeah, I became also a little bit homesick to Amsterdam. But I must say, it is very strange to come back to Amsterdam at the moment because it is... I think in my village are more things to do on the streets than in the center of Amsterdam at the moment. It is so quiet. People are very, very friendly. It's like something changed very deeply. For
the better? Is that?
Yeah, it is. You know what? For 1 or 2 days it would be fantastic, but we don't know how this will end. And that gives it also a feeling. The Germans have a fantastic word for that, unheimisch. Yeah. That is it also. It is a sleeping beauty, but the sleeping beauty is sometimes almost dead. Yeah.
But do you feel that we are going back to the old Amsterdam with all the tourists and all the craziness, or do you think that is?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think so. That in that way it was a kind of a wake up call. I think. I think for a lot of people, with all the problems and isolation and worry about work and life and so on, there is also, I feel, with a lot of people have the feeling. Perhaps this is a kind of a warning. This is a kind of we cannot go on in this way, and you see it especially in cities like Amsterdam, Venice, Rome, which are really.
But do you feel
totally
that
crazy? They became totally crazy, and the whole city structure was also, deformed and almost vanished because of all the tourist stuff.
But the question is obviously, I mean, you hear a lot of people saying that in Amsterdam and in Rome and in Venice and other cities that they feel that the city is theirs again. But do politicians feel that as well? That's going to be the question.
Yeah, but I think it is a very complicated balance we're in. You see, indeed, in the city, you see, it is our city again. Thank heaven. But that is not really a bad feeling. It is a feeling, it is our home a little bit again. That is a feeling which is not against outsiders. But it can go over in a kind of nationalism. Let's keep everybody out in the future. And you see it also within in European and in global level. You see it also. We have a totally global problem which needs international solutions. And at the same time, everybody is fleeing back to the national structures and the national thinking and to the national leaders. Even here in the Netherlands, everybody, now not everybody, but a lot of people still, our prime minister is fantastic. It's very strange. The national leaders are often also more popular than ever.
Yeah. And why do you say it's strange?
No, I think because these leaders are so making also a lot of mistakes, of course. And we will talk about journalism. Yeah. And you see also in Dutch newspapers, critical newspapers, you see a tendency of loyalty, which I can understand, to the government, which I can understand. One way I can understand it very well, because everybody is uncertain. Nobody knows for sure what is the best. But like every government, the Dutch government made a lot of mistakes, honestly. I have written now, as a follow-up of my recent history of Europe.
Yeah, just for the viewers, that people have an idea, because you wrote this incredible epos masterpiece, which is called In Europe, which came out, I believe, in 2004.
Yes.
But you started traveling in Europe to work on this book project in the late 90s already.
In the late
right?
90s, yes.
That was a Europe which was still in the aftermath of the...
There was a triumphalistic, almost euphoric mood. Everything will go better and better, and we have the euro, and we have, the Berlin Wall is forever gone, and there was really a triumphalistic mood, and that has changed totally, of course.
And politically, there were different political leaders as well.
Yeah, but it was still a generation in that time, in '99, when my book is based on a road trip through Europe for a whole year. In '99, and then in that time there were leaders who were still had a history with the Second World War, which is very important, because the European project is started as a peace project. We have totally forgotten that. We are talking now about economics, and we Dutch, we all talk about finance and so on, but it was a peace project, and these leaders were really, they knew very well that it was because a lot of them were in the war or just out of the war. They really felt the Second World War until in their bones. A lot of these leaders, and that is totally gone.
So let's go to today, because you revisited Europe.
Yes.
Right? Which is like 20 years later, more or less. Yeah. A new book came out. You're working on a new television series.
Yeah.
What is the Europe you found back? It's a very general question, obviously.
Yeah, it is a Europe which is grown up, learned a lot of things, went through a lot of crises, especially after 2010. The banking crisis, a refugee crisis, a euro crisis, Ukraine, survived rather complicated situations, learned a lot, but at the same time, the deep divisions between the European countries, especially between East and West and between North and South, became deeper and more painful. And you see it also now in this corona crisis. You see an East-West crisis, especially between Poland and Hungary and Brussels, especially about values. And you see also a North-South crisis between Germany and the Netherlands, especially, and, for instance, Italy and Spain. There is much more. There's less trust. In 2000, when was it? In 2012. Or 2010, the Greek Minister of Finance confessed to his colleagues that everything was wrong with the Greek situation. And they were really flabbergasted. that means that they trust each other quite a lot. And now it is really changed. There is not much trust anymore, and that is a big problem.
And what did, you know, I mean, then suddenly 2 months ago, we find ourselves in a pandemic where open borders in Europe are suddenly closed, where it's almost easier to go to China than to Belgium from the Netherlands. Is this making things worse, or is this could this also help Europe to be more united? Because
it can, yes, you're right. I say it is both ways. You see an international problem, a global problem which needs global solutions, and you see, especially in the scientific world, everybody is working with everybody. It's really like a totally international, the project. And at the same time, what I said, people fleeing to their leaders, to their national, certainly the national states, they're feeling at home at the national state, and the rest of the world is dangerous and far away. So we have to see what tendency will be permanent. But I'm afraid that the nationalism will be stronger after this corona crisis. Yes,
which
will be a new and heavy test for the European Union.
But it doesn't sound. You don't sound very optimistic.
It will be difficult. It really. One of our best thinkers in our country, Bram de Zwaan, he wrote a fantastic article in one of our weeklies, the Groene Amsterdammer, and he talked about a three-stage rocket. And he said, take care. Everything can go well, but first you have a health crisis, an enormous health crisis. Then you get an enormous economic crisis. And after that, almost for sure, there will be a political crisis. And it can be, it is not necessary, but it can be that it will be also a more nationalistic, more authoritarian, more right-wing, deep right-wing, and even fascist movement can come out of that. These movements are there already, and such a pandemic can make these movements stronger. But it can be also, it is not necessary. I'm just talking about future. And never ask historians about future, when they make always enormous mistakes. But it is really a serious danger at the moment. Yeah. Because,
you know, I mean, it's a global tendency, no? I mean,
yes.
The nationalism of Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil, or...
And the only possibility, and there's also Bolsonaro and also Donald Trump are authoritarian leaders, but their incompetence is of such such a level, and they are really behaving so crazy that I think at the moment, for instance, I can imagine for some kind of people to replicate a Putin regime. It is not my taste at all, terrible, but for some kind of people, they like that. And that has a kind of attraction, a strong leader. But really a total crazy leader, like Donald Trump, doesn't have much attraction. Irish Times...
Are you saying that he could lose the election?
It's possible, but the Democratic candidate is, of course, also not very strong. But in international fields, America is losing a lot of power, really, for sure. That is like a comment in the Irish Times was written. He said, a lot of people in the world have always had strong feelings about the United States, hate, love, admiration, and so on. But never we had this feeling which we have now, and that is pity. And that is really new. We have pity with the United States. And that says something about the situation of the leader, so-called leader of the Western world. And about also our situation and our position to China.
To go, one more question, to go a little closer to home. I'm sure that Cecilia will also have something to say about this. There was recently a big issue, especially between Italy and the Netherlands, because the Netherlands was kind of leading a blockade of financial support to countries who have been hit very hard by COVID-19, like Italy and Spain. What is your take on that? I mean, it's supposed to be a Europe, right? A unified.
Yeah. I like every journalist. Because I'm at the end a journalist, of course. Like every journalist, I'm always critical on our government, but it happens seldom that I'm feeling ashamed. And I was this whole way of doing, I felt ashamed. I can understand very well that the northern countries don't want immediately Eurobonds, because that connects their financial system for once and ever with the financial system and the problems of the South. That I can imagine that gives a lot of problems for also a lot of politicians. They cannot explain it to our voters. But this was an emergency situation, and really what the Dutch also wanted to block was the money from the European stability mechanism, and that money was there. And that was just unbelievable. And also the way Mr. Hoekstra did it.
Who's the minister?
Yeah,
the Dutch minister.
Wopke Hoekstra, yes. Because, and that's of course, I think everybody knows also the bad habits of their own fellow countrymen. And we Dutch have one bad habit, we have more, to playing the reverend. And to play the reverend on Sunday and preach and preach and preach. And to Monday morning to seduce the housemaid. That is this kind of reverence we are. And Wopke Hoekstra is really, I felt very ashamed with his preaching, because this was an emergency.
He doesn't seem to get it.
It has nothing to do with the sometimes complicated and even bad financial state of certain countries. You have to separate that. So I really, he could have, and he got a lot of opposition. I must say, even from.
But he never apologized, did he?
No, and I got support from the Dutch Parliament. I felt ashamed again, because what he was doing, in fact, was undermined the whole euro system.
No.
Indeed, the last part of trust we had, he was undermining that. And again, about Eurobonds, you can talk a lot, but you could help the southern countries on a lot of other ways, and that you have to do full-hearted.
There's one question from the audience. Do you think there will be an overall decentralization of power in Europe? Are countries going back to their? You kind of said, right? That
I hope that there will partly a decentralization and part a centralization. I think the European Union is a very strange federation. A lot of powers which are in other federations, like the United States, are decentralized. For instance, when you talk about the bread and about a lot of stuff, are decentralized in the United States, and in Europe it's centralized. And other powers, which are all federations, are centralized. For instance, military, foreign politics, the big finance, and so on, are decentralized. So it is a little bit a strange federation, and it cannot go on in this way. But I think, please decentralize when it is possible. But some other problems we have, for instance, this corona crisis, partly you have to react centralized, because when we open the borders and so on, partly we have to react decentralized, because the health systems of all those different countries are very, very different. But I must say honestly, the European Union, it was not that healthcare has been a task of the European Union. So it was always the national states want exactly what the European Union did now, doing almost nothing, because they wanted it.
Let's bring in our guests. Maybe you have a question for Geert as well, or an observation. Cecilia?
Yes, no, I wanted to...
Are we still welcome? Are the Dutch still welcome in Italy?
Of course, since the 3rd of June, when we will reopen the borders. And yes, I wanted just to make a comment about what Geert said on the Dutch opposition to the financial measure towards the southern countries. It was not an isolated position, I have to say. You can remember Der Spiegel, and one of the issue that was basically saying don't give money to Italy because mafia will manage them. And also this created a big outrage in Italy, of course. But if we have to be sincere, that was exactly the same issue that was reasoned by Roberto Saviano, a world famous author that has been fighting against the Napolitan Camorra. I mean, is a mafia expert since 10 years. So there is a part of reason in having this fear of giving at least I'm talking about Italy. I don't know about Spain, because the rate of corruption in Italy is very high. But the other thing is that it's clear that all the premiers in this case are talking to their voters. That's the problem with this kind of Europe that we have today. So I was hearing guys talking about decentralization and of some parts of the competences and centralization of others. Don't you think that also the sentiment should be more united, since otherwise really every premier is going always to talk about towards their fellow countrymen and not for a bigger good?
Because Cecilia, you founded the investigative reporting project. Can you tell a little bit what that means, what it is, what you do? Because you're a journalist.
Yes,
right?
Sure. Yes, so we are basically do investigative stories about COVID and not only. And in all the and we found out very easily that in a situation of emergency where there are a lot of money because you have to act quick, it's very easy to enter for people that are going to fraud the state or for criminals that are getting into the business. And we found many of these stories, if you want to see in irp.eu, about, I don't know, the masks market or the test market. There was a joint investigation with OCCRP about totally non-functioning test, Siero test that have been used in Europe.
So are you saying that the, let's say the regular media, the established media, is not really doing their job properly? I mean, in Holland, there's some criticism that Dutch journalists have not been critical enough about the government, for example, the measures that the government implemented, and have not been asking the questions which should have been asked.
Absolutely, I totally agree. At least at the beginning, there was this feeling of we have to be all together with our government. We cannot criticize them because they are facing such incredible, terrible, and difficult situation. What else they could do? and nobody was making the right questions. So we started making them, and we found out that even if it was a new situation, there was a very bad level of managing of the crisis. There was, I don't know.
But from the central government, because what I understood is also that the regions in Italy, to tackle this crisis, got a lot of power.
Unfortunately, from both the levels, from the central government and from the regions. This was another issue that came out with the crisis. Also, the regions started to act as little governments. Because the situation of the disease has been very different throughout Italy. As you probably know, in the north, in Lombardy, there was the majority of people that got coronavirus, and if it was a state, it would have been one of the most hit countries in the world, and that's why the region started to ask their own, to be differentiated by, for example, Lombardy, and also competition for resources started. That is very dangerous.
So are you saying that it could have been managed better? Because in the end, Lombardy is the richest, probably at least one of the richest regions in Italy, right?
Absolutely, and that was another funny thing that happened in this crisis. Lombardy was the richest, the region where the health system was considered the best, and it was a disaster, a total disaster. Not only, of course, for sure, there was the first patient, and you can say it was bad luck, but there was also a really criminal way of managing the disease, because there is the highest concentration of factories, for example, and they didn't want to to shut down the factories. We are talking about billions of profits, and they started minimizing, and then they closed all Italy because they didn't want to stop Lombardy. So there was this strange feelings of, for the first time, the south of Italy was behaving better than the north, and there was this new resentment towards the north of Italy that was a very interesting,
indeed, right?
Sociologically speaking.
Because we were watching from a distance, and we were thinking, oh my God, if this comes to Naples, like what happened in Bergamo, or it would have been, what would have happened?
Yeah, of course, that is the feeling that we all had. And the health system in the south is for sure much more fragile, and also the density of population of certain cities like Naples, for example, is very. Is a rich plate for this kind of virus. Truth is that. Thanks to the containment measures that have been followed also by the southern citizens, this didn't happen. Of course, there are also other kind of explanations that have been coming out in these days. For example, the virus could be linked to the pollution. And the Pianura Padana, Lombardy is far the most polluted region in Italy, or that the high level of mobility of workers and citizens in the north has probably spread virus far before the first patient, and that's why the contagious was so fast and so strong.
What happened to your former prime minister? He was always very vocal. He seems to be very quiet, or is that just the impression because we are too far away?
You mean who? Silvio Berlusconi?
No, not
Which former?
no,
prime
Matteo,
minister?
the last one.
Matteo Salvini.
Yeah.
Matteo Salvini it wasn't the prime minister, and
thank heaven.
it is,
Oh, true. Yeah.
We have always the same prime minister, even if before we had a right-wing government, and now we have so to say left-wing government.
But is he quiet, or is that just the wrong impression?
He has been quiet for a while because, of course, it couldn't. Let's say all the eyes were towards the government and what they were doing. So he's being, doing some Facebook videos, but it wasn't very aggressive as it used to be, because we had to be united and so on. Now he started again, specifically with the European measures that they are against, because it would be like admitting that we can lose some sovereignty. So they are starting again, but he's losing a lot. Also because Lombardy is a stronghold of Lega, and the president of Lombardy hasn't been very successful in the management of the crisis, and is still not going well.
Because
even now,
you're still sheltering many thousands of refugees as well.
Of course, there is a lower flux, but yes, there was now a battle that was taken on by Salvini against this law that was signed a couple of days ago, that allowed the regularization for workers, immigrant workers in the fields of agriculture and house services. So it was actually, if you want to say, it's we need them to pick up our strawberries, so we give them a permit for 6 months, and then we can throw them away. So it's not that big of a deal for a person who's been looking for a better life in our country, but still is something. And of course, this was strongly opposed by both Salvini and Meloni, which is the leader of Fratelli d'Italia, the even more right-wing party that is in coalition with the Salvini. But yes, Salvini lost at least 6 points in this crisis, because the management of health system is not his thing. They're not his teams on the
So he would not have managed it any better.
I don't know, but I'm actually happy that he was not in power, because his tendency for authoritarian, way of leading the government is quite clear. It was quite clear even before.
So are you a little bit optimistic about Italian politics?
I'm never optimistic. I have to say.
Because there's a question from the audience, Cecilia, which is: do you feel that the press, or the freedom of the press, is it under pressure in Italy? We had a recent merge of some
not the real merge, but there is now a big editorial group linked to Fiat and Elkann family, and this make it a little bit difficult for the diversity in the media panorama in Italy. But I don't think there is a real problem for the press freedom. There is, in terms of big publishers, it's true that there are few. They're all very well connected with either with politics or with industrial groups. But there is still space for independent media, as we are here to testify.
And Europe, are you optimistic? You know, I mean, Geert was talking about a fear that that countries are becoming more nationalistic, going back to their own what they feel traditions, or.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question at stake for sure, an issue at stake for sure. I think that the European Commission now is at a pivotal moment. Either they go united I mean, the economical crisis will be incredible for all the countries. In Italy, for sure, but I don't think that it will be much better for other countries. So, and of course, we are all very well connected economically and socially. So, I really think that this is a pivotal moment. Either Europe will go one way and become stronger, and I mean, it will be better for all the countries that are members, or it will go in the other sense, creating a more and more separated Europe, where only the nations are making the difference. So only the most powerful and most strong and the strongest, economically speaking, countries are going to benefit from Europe.
Yeah, and Geert or Gergő, you agree with this?
Yeah, I still think that European Union can survive because it is not so idealistic anymore like it was in the past, but we need each other desperately just to survive. To survive. What's happening now, this corona crisis, is just a general repetition for the climate problem. And in the climate the crisis, we can only survive it together. But for instance, also, what's our position in the world? Europe is a world power. And we have to learn to be a world power. The Americans always picked up the pieces for us, and that's not anymore happening. So I think just to survive, we have to be together, and I think also the survival will bring us together. But it is not a dream anymore. It's just surviving.
Mm. Because Gergő, I mean, you're from Budapest. You're Hungarian. Geert was talking earlier about the divisions between not only North-South Europe but also East-West. How do you view this? Because I mean, you are part of Europe, and
yeah, I hope so. I mean, you know, it's. I don't know how to express this kind of feeling, because it's, you know, it's just like if as a Hungarian you travel to Western Europe, you will see mostly similar culture to yours with a lot of overlaps. Still, it's very much different, even if we are in the same political and economic union. So, I mean, I think that is what is fascinating about Europe, that somehow it's one thing, somehow it's a lot of things, lots of cultures, lots of difference, even inside countries and between regions. And so, I mean, that kind of richness is I think it's a value. It's a European value. So for sure, differences, yeah, they exist. I don't think they are necessarily bad.
Because you are the director of Direct 36. Can you tell us what that is?
So this is
You're a journalist as well, right?
Yeah,
Yourself.
I am a journalist. Okay, more an editor than a real journalist, but still. So that is Direct 36 is a small investigative outlet. We mostly cover corruption, misuse of power, that kind of stuff. Of course, now with this special situation, we covered a lot coronavirus, but yeah, that's an exception for us. And we are a non-profit center, which means that we have a subscription-based model. We get donations also from bigger foundations, but the main income source is what our readers support us with.
And when did you start? When was it started?
2015 in February, so it's our 5th year. Before that, we were all working for huge or popular media outlets in Hungary, mostly online. The two big,
because Hungary changed quite a bit since 2015. I mean, Orban is in power. People say he's using the COVID-19 crisis to gain power, even more power, executive power. What's your view on this? And what's your view about the freedom of the press in Hungary at the moment?
So I think somehow that brings us back to your first question, the differences inside Europe. And somehow I feel like that most of the coverage, not all, there were some very good pieces in international media about what's going on in Hungary. In many cases, it's just very superficial. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's normal. If we are talking about Dutch audience, I mean, for sure, there are some real freaks who are really interested in what's going on in Hungary. But for most of the readers or most of the audience, there's a threshold. And that threshold is necessarily low because you are interested in your own politics, in your own political system and what's going on there. So speaking about Hungary, it's so far away. It's another cup of tea. So many times I felt like during the coronavirus that the international coverage is rather superficial. And this thing about, I guess, you are referring to these new measures that the government took during the coronavirus, that it implemented rule by decree law. And everyone says, yes, that's a next step towards becoming an authoritarian regime. I don't think that's the case.
Why not?
Why not? Mm-hmm. Because where are the supporting facts and where are the proofs for that? What is the proof? So I think there are not. There are more fantasies about it and more speculation than facts and.
So do you feel that Europe is too critical on or too harsh on Hungary?
So that's very European. Sometimes I think the criticism is like too much or not going into the right direction. Sometimes I feel like why Europe is so silent about what's going on in Hungary. But that's because the different perspectives we have. As a Hungarian voter or a Hungarian person or a Hungarian journalist, I see what's going on in Hungary with a different eye as you do. So sometimes I feel like the debates that go on inside the European institutions about Hungary are just like, people punching the punchbacks. It's not really about the real problems.
Sorry, may I ask a question?
Yeah, go.
But we're following, of course, the situation in Hungary from a distance. But what I read was also that for journalists it can be much more difficult and complicated in the new situation. You can get punished for your articles and even put in jail. What I understood. How do you think about that?
Because
Yeah, sorry, go on.
I saw some of the pieces that the Direct 36 did, and it's very critical about Orban family.
I mean, we are critical with decision makers, and we wrote stories also about opposition parties. But obviously, the big story in Hungary right now is Fidesz and Orban during the past 10 years, because they have a 2/3 supermajority in the parliament, which means that they can change any laws they want. Mm-hmm. So that makes them so interesting. And of course, not only that, also the political culture they created. But it's difficult to be an investigative journalist covering corruption and not writing a lot of time about the actual government. And there's a part of it, of course, the family businesses of the prime minister, which require attention. And yeah, we just try to do our job. But going back to Geert's question, I think that's not the case. Mm. So we are talking about a change of one part of the penal code in Hungary, which says that if you spread false rumors during a special situation like the one of coronavirus, you can be jailed. And lots of critics said that this is not a good step by the government because it can be used against critical journalists. Yeah. But I mean, you can read the law like this, and you can read the law as I think maybe it was invented. Like it's really a huge problem in the times we live now. If false news are spread about a so critical situation like coronavirus, and yeah, it can be used as a political tool. That's true, which is not comfortable. But I don't feel like more threatened or I mean under more pressure than before, simply because we always try to be very careful. We do a lot of fact checking on our own job. So I think if you don't do stupid things, you cannot be punished by
but
that.
But it does open a door, no? Mm. It does open a door that it could be possible.
Yeah, it opens maybe a door that it could be possible and not. So, I mean, you have to take a very extreme example to see how it can be used against journalists in Hungary.
Can I make a question?
Yes.
There was a similar law in Serbia recently because of the coronavirus, also against fake news. And I mean, Anna Lalic was jailed, and she's a very prominent journalist because she made a very simple investigation on the Novi Sad hospital, talking with doctors and nurses that would stay anonymous. Because otherwise they would lose their job, and that's what we are doing too. Because in Italy it's the same now with this emergency. If you're a doctor and you say what's not really going on in the hospital, you can lose your job. And she was jailed thanks to this. I wanted to ask you, what about Hungary? Can you make them talk anonymously and get away with it?
Yeah, I mean, there were some cases when prosecutors started investigations against journalists or the police, not related to this change of law we are talking about now. But they were more like exceptions. And I have the same feeling with this law, that I don't really think that the intentions was to control journalists. You have to see this, that I don't really think that the Hungarian government right now needs a change of a law of the penal code to control journalism and to control public opinion. So that would be a huge overstatement of how forceful Hungarian journalism and Hungarian media is. So that doesn't make it very much likely that this will happen. Of course, there is always a possibility. But as my first boss used to say it, if you are a journalist, it's like when you are a miner. When you are a miner, you go underground to work there, and you don't complain that there is darkness there, because that's your job. When you are a journalist, it's better not to complain about the frameworks, the circumstances. That's, I think, the job of NGOs and people who work for rights of freedom or promoting those freedom rights. As a journalist, my job is to investigate newsworthy stories, to keep the powerful in check, and
Sorry, but may I ask you, do you feel totally free at the moment to say everything you want?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, that is, of course, very important for our profession.
I feel completely free to see whatever I want. I don't really think that thing can be anything. I mean, as a journalist, I just cannot start to make political statements, not because it's dangerous, just because it would be a complete misunderstanding of my own role.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But do you feel that this whole COVID-19, are you coming out of a lockdown as well, right? It's opening up. Did it bring any good to Hungary?
The coronavirus.
Yes.
I mean, people realize that home office is not a terrible thing. Maybe that's one thing, and people spend more time with their families. That's another good thing. On the other hand, just like in your countries, this was a really special situation that we have never experienced before, or not in my lifetime, let's say this. There were strange measures taken by decision makers, the government, and also municipality leaders. But overall, if you check the numbers in Hungary, we have a pretty low fatality rate compared to the population. We have a very low rate of infections, and I don't know if it's how the government treated the virus, or if there are other factors. I don't know, but the overall feeling, I think, is that. We were lucky, or we were among the luckiest countries, at least in Europe.
Yeah.
Of course, you can see that the public opinion, in the public opinion, this moves in the favor of the government. Mm-hmm. Most people are happy with what happened. I mean, more people are happy than how many of them voted for Fidesz 2 years ago in the elections. But just as in other parts of Europe, this is the first phase of the crisis, the actual virus, and this led to the rise of the popularity of the governing parties. I think now round 2 comes when the economic problems will be much more obvious for more people. So let's see how that goes, and how deep that crisis will be, and what will it bring to the society and to the government and to the popularity of politicians and political parties.
There is one difference, I think, between Hungary and most other European countries, and I think perhaps all, that in Hungary the emergency measures can be as long as Orban wants. There is no time, there is no end, what I understood. And that is a big difference. How are people thinking about that? Because then you use, and you see it often also in the past happening, that after such an emergency, the measures the governments have taken are staying. Even in medieval time was happening there already. And again, from a distance, I have the impression that the Hungarian government is now doing the same to try to keep this measure for a long time and perhaps forever. Is a good observation? How do you think about that?
So you really have to understand that the Hungarian legal system, if you have a 2/3 majority in the parliament, not many things can stop you from accepting laws. Mm-hmm. So the government didn't really need the coronavirus and the special measures taken during the coronavirus to do whatever it wants. So in this sense, this is not a new situation. In this sense, you can see all these special measures as a special response to a special situation, because even without the special measures, the government does whatever it wants again. And it has been like this during the past 10 years. There were some years of exception when the governing parties lost their supermajority because some MPs died, and on the elections, opposition politicians were elected. But you have to see this, that there's not a big difference. I mean, technically speaking, there's no difference between what's going on now and what was possible before the virus.
I think I understand you very well. Yes. Yeah.
But I think at the same time, it's very, during a crisis, it's much easier to sell it to your population that those measures are necessary than before, when there was not such a thing as Corona. And
yes, but again, you don't need any more measures to do whatever the government wants. So I mean, if the government tomorrow decides, now there's one of the ministers, the minister who's leading the Prime Minister's office, said recently that the government is already considering to give back these special forces it got during the coronavirus. And I think it can tell you what can be also behind these special measures, what can be another explanation besides that the Hungarian government has this tendency to take some steps towards, by European commentators, so-called authoritarian direction. So you can see it as a strategical move in internal politics. Like, if the government gives back these special measures, it will be a very good point to say, can you see, you always talk about it, how authoritarian we are, and this is not the case. And again, even if those measures will be cancelled, the government can do whatever it wants, and doesn't matter if it's coronavirus and special measures or not.
Okay, fair enough. And how do you I mean, Hungary and Europe, is that going to be a happy marriage?
That's something I really like, and that's the question I was waiting for. But the answer is too long. I mean, that's a special relation, and I feel it like, what Geert talked about previously was very interesting for me when he said that maybe politics will become more authoritarian, more nationalistic, and I found interesting this use of nationalism, the word nationalism, because, and I'm not talking now as a journalist, I'm talking as a middle-aged Hungarian. If you travel in Southern Europe or if you travel in Western Europe, you can see all these proud people who are very proud about their nationality, about their culture. Of course, they will always complain, saying, "Oh, we are diverse," but at the bottom of their hearts, there's always this big happiness of who they are. And coming from Eastern Europe, this is not quite the same thing. And when you talk about nationalism, I feel like, from my perspective, it's like not necessarily a bad thing as a Hungarian. A country living under foreign occupation for 40 years, then becoming a part of the so-called free world, where the competitiveness of countries like Hungary was like ridiculous, and we can see that it takes a lot of time to how to say, to reach Western Europe, or this so-called dream we have in Hungary. So from this point of view, maybe we see this part of the story a little bit differently. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't see the future. I'm completely pro-EU, but on the other hand, I see a lots of problems with the system we have now, and it leads us back to my job. In many cases, when we are investigating misuse of power or corruption, and somehow it's related to EU funds, it's nearly ridiculous to find out that it's nearly more difficult to get out any information of the European Union than to get out information from this very, very hostile Hungarian government. So everyone is complaining about how politics became aggressive in Hungary and how we are shifting towards authoritarianism. And it's very funny to see this criticism coming from Europe when we had lots of stories about corruption, when European money was used for corruption. And it was easier to find sources in Hungary and in the Hungarian government and to find data about it than to find any response from Europe. So, I mean, I would ask European leaders, is Hungary a real problem, or just to a certain extent, just when it can be criticized politically? And there's another side of the coin, maybe. And this kind of two sides of Europe, I think they haven't made a good friendship yet. So I think the future of Europe depends on how this will work out, which side will be the upside.
We will find out, or not.
Yes.
We have to leave it here. So I really would like to thank you, Geert, Gergő, and Cecilia for being here and to give us your insights and about the situation in your countries and in a bigger perspective, which is called Europe. Next week we are back. I think we will be the 27th of May with another emerging stories. And next week we will have Corny Braam in the studio, who's a Dutch writer, author, former anti-apartheid activist, and she just wrote a book, so more about that next week. And we will have Khadija Patel, who is the editor-in-chief of the Mail and Guardian in South Africa. And one more guest from South Africa to be announced very soon. Thanks again for watching, and hope to see you next week. And have a nice evening or day. Thank you again, and bye for now. Bye.
Bye-bye.